Alright, so I said I might do another video, and I'm going to because I realized that the concept of nightmares in SINoALICE really hasn't been addressed by anybody yet, so I'll do that. Before I start, I do want to say thank you again to the SINoALICE Discord for kind of helping me flesh out a lot of these questions and figure out what needed to be answered, and thanks to Kent, again, Kent, you're doing too much, for kind of helping me polish up what I'm going to be talking about during the video, because he had some ideas and some things I forgot to mention. So, anyways, first off, what is a nightmare? In SINoALICE, a nightmare is the equivalent of a summon. Nightmares have their own grid, and they have their own subgrid. Your main nightmare grid can hold 5 nightmares, and your subgrid can hold up to 30. Nightmares can be used by any character and any job, so don't worry about needing anything other than the nightmare itself. So there's no real limitations. Another one people ask is, why should I even care about nightmares? For one, they're amazing for extra stats. Like stat sticks, they're great. The buffs they give as well can really augment your grid and your allies as well, because a lot of them have allied buffs, and it lets you be way stronger than you actually should be. As an example, I'm going to quickly pull up 3 nightmares. All of them are SS rank, and that's their default rank in the gacha. First off, we have Lindworm on the left. He's for Wind Element, and he gives a great boost to all wind skills for all allies. Then you have Oogaloo, or however you pronounce that lion's name, I'm not even sure. And he does the same thing, but for fire. And then you have Freeze Golem, does the same thing for water. Now, something else to mention here, nightmares have 2 skills. They have 1 skill split into 2 parts. One for story and one for Coliseum. It's actually the same skill in the same tier, but it has a story effect and a Coliseum effect. It's a balance thing. So easiest thing to remember it by, it has a PvE skill and a PvP skill. If you're in Coliseum, it does one thing, anywhere else it does something else. So, when you get a nightmare, it's a good idea to check this and make sure you know what it does. All you do is you just open up your nightmare information and just click on the skills down here or tap, boom, it'll open this for you. Another one people love to ask, as with every game, what is the best? In this case, nightmare. So, a lot like everything else in SINoALICE, there's no best nightmare. There is no one-size-fits-all. Example, if you ran a massive sword grid and you got a nightmare that boosted your hammer skills, it's pretty much worthless to you outside of a stat stick. But maybe it'll help your friends, right? But on the flip side, let's say you rolled a nightmare that boosted blade skills. That would be a treasure for you because your entire grid is all swords, right? So it really depends on what you have and what the nightmare does. So pretty much like everything else in SINoALICE, it's more about the application of what you have and understanding what makes you and your allies stronger and what complements your grids. Another one is, can I get nightmares in the tutorial reroll? So, coincidentally, the 3 nightmares that I have up there are the 3 nightmares that show up in the tutorial gacha, and you can reroll for them. Now, the cool thing with these 3 nightmares is, at best, they're matched down the line. And that's like looking into the future of JP here, like 2 years down the line, they're at best matched. Due to the great increase in the elemental skill damage that has no demerits, and then you can upgrade them to massive when you evolve them to L rank, you're going to be hard-pressed to find something better, if not as good as them later on. Because that's the thing, right? Even though there's a lot of nightmares that have the same skills, they might have a demerit, or maybe they'll have an extra effect. So if you manage to roll one of these, at best, you're going to find, or I guess at worst, however you want to look at it, you're going to find a nightmare that does the same thing. So really, I would argue that these nightmares are amazing for a tutorial reroll, the fact they're still viable. Now, thinking about that, should you reroll for them? That's another one, because as soon as I start talking about the nightmares in the tutorial reroll, someone always asks, well, should I reroll for them? It's totally up to you. The tutorial roll nightmares, these 3, have an amazing shelf life. Like I said, even 2 years down the line, they're still good, and they bring just superb buffs to you and your allies. Problem is, nightmares have abysmal rates in the gacha, and Anecdotally, 6 months of playing JP, I only got one nightmare, and it was when I was sparking for Snow White's Crusher job. So it wasn't just like an off-the-cuff YOLO and I got it. It was, I was already investing a ton of gems into the gacha to try to get something, and it showed up, and I was really happy about it. Also, during the JP reroll session, I knew a lot of people that were rerolling, lots of emulator copies and clones, and I think less than 5 people actually got a nightmare during that. So, your discretion. If you feel lucky or determined, go ahead. Personally, I think getting one nightmare is worth missing out on the jobs and the SS weapons due to the sheer rarity of the nightmares that can evolve that you can get in the gacha, right? And in the last video, I said you should focus on getting 2 or more jobs in your tutorial role and perhaps aim for one of the 3 nightmares that show up. It's really up to you there. 2 or more jobs isn't too hard to do. But getting a nightmare on top of that, it's like a unicorn roll. It's up to you what you think is worth rerolling for. But me, I'm probably going to try rerolling for a nightmare because I didn't do that in JP, and I wish I did, looking back. Now, what types of nightmares are there? Because there's a lot of different types. So we have some that are locked behind the gacha. There's some you can farm. There's some that are locked behind in-game purchases. And if we were to loosely classify each of these, there's buffers, debuffers, SP cost reducers, and SP restorers. So those last 2 are pretty important for Coliseum, at least in my opinion, because you're going to find yourself burning through SP mashing your attacks. And it also ranges from elemental to defensive, physical to magical. There's all sorts of buffs, all sorts of abilities. And due to just the sheer amount of them, I'm actually going to recommend reading up on the wiki if you want to see everything that's available in the game. I'll link the relevant section in the wiki in the comments, so you can just go there and look at it and see what's available. But note, that'll show everything, so if you don't want to be spoiled, avoid it. Another one people want to know is, how do I use nightmares? So it's actually really simple. First off, you roll the nightmare, and then you equip it into, or shouldn't say roll, you obtain a nightmare, and then you equip it into one of your 5 primary slots, one of these 5 here. Once you've done that, enter combat. When you're in combat, you'll have your ability hotbar at the bottom with your weapons, and you'll see a button that allows, I'm pretty sure it says nightmares, or it should say nightmares in the global version. I can't remember what the UI actually says, but it's a unique button. You click on it, it'll bring up a list of all of your nightmares. You click on it, and there you go. Now, once you click on it, there's a short buffer time, kind of like a prep period, and your nightmare will activate after that and use its skill. It should be noted that nightmares do have different SP costs, prep time, and durations for their skills, so make sure you know how yours works before you start using it. Now, thinking about using skills. This is important, and I recommend everyone try their best to follow along, because this is kind of important. Are nightmares per person or per guild, and how does it work? It's going to be a little weird explaining this, so just bear with me. Nightmares, as I've said, have one skill with 2 effects. One for story, one for Coliseum. PvE, PvP. With that in mind, during any battle, a skill can only be used once per side. So if you and another member on your team have the same nightmare, only one of you can use it. Once it gets summoned and the skill is used, any other player in your party cannot use the same nightmare or skill. Because like I said, like if I click on this nightmare here and you see the skill that it has, I need to long press it, right? I'm so used to other games here. Anyways, skills have different tiers on them, right? So 1 through 3. SINoALICE will consider skills, so this skill name, right, it's a tier 1 skill. If this was a tier 2 or a tier 3, it wouldn't matter. SINoALICE would classify all of them as the same skill. If another nightmare had this skill and someone in my party used it, I couldn't use this nightmare. Even though it's a different nightmare, it's the same skill. So skills can only be used once per party, I guess is the best way to phrase it. And your party consists of everyone that's allied with you. In PvP, your party and the enemy's party, 2 separate entities. So you can use a skill and then the enemy guild can use the same skill, but that would be it. So it's 1 skill usage. That's all you get. You can use multiple skills, but you can only use 1x of the same skill. It's a little weird to explain. Hopefully it comes across. Now, with that, talking about nightmares and all the fun stuff that comes along with their skills, I heard there are paid nightmares. There are. There are some that are locked behind straight in-game purchases. They cost a flat amount, and you have to use real currency to exchange for it. At least that's how it worked in JP. No reason to think Global is going to be any different, but I'm covering my bases. Paid and gacha nightmares actually have 0 SP cost to use. That's an important thing to remember. Farmable and things like that, those nightmares have an SP cost to them. Gacha and paid do not. So keep that in mind. Normally, nightmares cost 50 SP to use in story missions and 200 to use in Coliseum. So being able to reduce that to 0 might be pretty helpful. Insert eyebrow wiggles here. Let's say you don't want to buy nightmares. That's another thing that people bring up. I want to be a free to play. I don't want to whale. That's fine. There are farmable nightmares that share the abilities of the paid and gacha nightmares. Granted, not all of them have a farmable alternative, but some of them do. Again, check the wiki out if you're really curious. You can kind of look through it, figure it out. You gotta remember, first and foremost, this is a gacha game. There are alternatives, but they do suffer from a much lower overall stat total than a paid or a gacha nightmare. Actually, perfect. You know what? I'll bring up an exact one here. So, here, 3 nightmares, they all have the exact same skill. Now, if you look at the stat totals, you can see a huge disparity, and that's at level 80. Okay, so let's say all of them are level 80. You can see the story one on the far left, the SS rank, has less than 3,000 total stats. The other 2, paid, have over 6,000 total stats. It doesn't just end there though. Let's say you actually leveled them up to the maximum value of 120 for L rank. All of a sudden, those stats jump up. You now have 3,000 versus 8,000, or 7.7 thousand. So even though there are farmable alternatives for some of them, there are still demerits. Mainly, your stat stick ain't going to be as big as the other guys. But you gotta roll with the punches. It is a gacha game. So, another one people do ask, does evolving a nightmare do anything other than add stats? Well, as you can see, stats are a pretty big deal, but beyond that, yes. Evolving a nightmare not only gives it a better stat pool, but it also decreases the cast buffer, the preparation time, while also increasing the duration of the skill. At least that's true for the majority, to my understanding. I'm not sure if every single one abides by that, but you can pretty much assume everyone does play by that rule. Evolution will also change the appearance of the nightmare. Sometimes it'll remove a mask or maybe add an extra feature or something like that. So, just so you're aware. And then there's a couple of extra things I wanted to add in that weren't really asked, but I think it should still be brought up here. Since most nightmare skills are for all the allies, you shouldn't feel too much pressure on missing out on the gacha nightmares. Because, like I said, during the Coliseum, right, you can only use one skill, or you can only use a skill once anyways. So if your teammate rolled in the gacha or did the pay and got the nightmare, that's it. Your entire guild technically has it now, right? So there's not a ton of pressure, unless, you're the guy that the guild's relying on to get it. But at that point, that's a you problem, right? So, and yeah, I think that's actually it. And the other miscellaneous one I had was actually was whether or not you could farm instead of buying them. Anyways, so yeah, hopefully that was enough information about the nightmares and how they work in SINoALICE and all that stuff, because I know that there's a lot of weird things that this game does that people are not used to. So I don't mind making the guides and the videos to help explain things. So anyways, I'll wrap it up. If you have any questions, feel free to, just ask away in the comments, or even better, go to that official Discord that's there. Let me just remove these images real quick here. The official Discord there in the top corner, I'll also put it in the comments. You can click there and join. We have a help corner, so if you have questions, feel free to ask there, wherever works for you. And yeah, maybe I'll make another video if people need it. Who knows? See ya!